Hey, what up guys? It's Sick, and today we're going to talk about something pretty cool. It's called MQ2 Buff Me. Now, I started MQ2 Buff Me back in 2020, maybe 2021, like early. So it's been, it's been around for a couple of years. And just didn't really get around to putting it in a position to be able to release it. It's actually already in your RedGuides build now, just nobody's noticed, which is funny. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to request buffs from any class. And it works fairly similarly to what I did with the Guildhall Buff Bot functionality of the Chat with This Name class plugins. However, you can do it anywhere and it'll do stuff in combat. I decided this week to spend a little time on it. Somebody asked about MQ2 Druid. Since it's in pre-release, they asked about the Guildhall Buff Bot, and I started working on that. And I'm like, you know what? We should just do MQ2 Buff Me. One of the strange things is the overlap in the command, because you can send a tell requesting this stuff. So if you're using one of the Chat with This Name class plugins and you have MQ2 Buff Me loaded, you'll use that instead of the other stuff, which I would recommend just using MQ2 Buff Me because some of the functionality is pretty sweet. Now, you don't have to have a Chat with This Name class plugin to use MQ2 Buff Me. You can request any spell by any name, and if it's a buff or something that summons something, you'll do it. Like if you ask the bard, hey, I need you to cast your cure song on me, it'll do that. It'll memorize the cure song and then cast it on the person. But if you do have a Chat with This Name class plugin character that is requesting from, there is some additional functionality. So I have here on my screen, you can see the shaman in the middle. On the right hand side, I have a beast lord, a cleric, and an enchanter. And I'm going to show you what it looks like when we request buffs, but we'll kind of hop into this. So you can request stuff by So Buff Me also allows you to, if you have a Chat with This Name class plugin loaded, you can actually do all of its write out information into the Chat with This Name class plugin window, which is pretty cool. So if I do just a /buffme, it's the same as doing like a Buff Me help, right? And it'll spit out and say, these are your commands: UI, buff me on, pause macros, buff guild only, buff me silent, buff request phrase, debug, buff them, display UI, and UI. So I'll go over these real quick. Buff me on just means like, hey, you want the functionality to work, on, off, true, false, whatever. Pause macros. This is going to pause any macro you have running and then unpause it afterwards. Now, if it's already paused before we do something, we're not going to unpause it. So if it was previously paused, because you are paused, we're not just going to unpause your macro that you paused elsewhere. But what it does mean is if you're running Kiss Assist or RG Mercs or XGen or Modbot or any of those, and you do a Buff Me request and it's turned on so the functionality is working, you'll pause that macro, you'll do your buff, and then you will go back about your business. This does pause the Chat with This Name class plugins, and because we put in some API functionality, we actually have the plugin pause itself instead of just doing a command to pause it. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. We have buff guild only, so this will only respond back to guildmates. Buff me silent, that means you don't respond back. That's actually going to be defaulted true, so if you send somebody like Buff Me to see if they're running like MQ2 Buff Me, it's not going to do it. You can change your buff request phrase, and then there's the display UI. This is like if you always want it displayed, or Buff Me UI. So we'll just do Buff Me UI right now to display what it looks like. And there's like a settings tab that doesn't have any options right now. All of these options will be in here. And then there's the Buff Me. And so right now, if you don't have any requests in, it's not going to show anything. But this is what it looks like when somebody sends requests. Now, keep in mind, I have all of those, which direction? That way. I have all those characters logged in. I'm going to hit a button on a tank on another. It's actually another computer. I'm going to say, boom. I hit my button. There you go. Everybody is now memorizing spells, and you'll see on the screen you have the cues. So it paused the chat with the same class plugin. It says paused by MQ2 Buff Me. Buff Me is now memorizing the spells that we asked for, and now we're casting those spells, and you'll see them slowly go from this queue. Now you can change the order of the queue here. So there's a push to top button, there's a push to down button, and then there's like a we don't want this button anymore. For example, I'm going to click that button a bunch more times. It's going to put the same 3 buffs requesting from the same characters. And we're just going to show you what that organization looks like, right? So let me just spam this a bunch. So boom, we've got all these. Maybe I'm like, nah, Spirit of Talatak. We're going to get rid of all the Spirit of Talataks. We don't want those. Boom. Let's put these regens down the bottom. Boom. Now it's going to do these 3 first. And you see the class icon as well. I'm anonymized, so you just see their class and level. Normally that would say their name, but I put the class icon there so you could see where that's at. So once it's done with this last buff, it is going to unpause it again, and it'll say in here. So every 30 seconds, while it still has buffs to do, it's going to let you know that it's still working on stuff. Just so if you look over here, you're like, why am I not doing anything? It's going to let you know that it's still doing stuff. So we got to the point where pause is now off, set by MQ2 Buff Me, and because we're out of combat, the chat with this name class plugin put the spell back where it's at. Currently, and for the foreseeable future, we don't keep track of what spell got memorized over for the purposes of putting it back to where it was in combat. You know what's missing from the options? Buff me help. Yes, you actually can change what your miscellaneous gem is. So like what your buff spell gem is. So I'll make sure we get that updated and put in the commands tab. Keep in mind, this is still very early. Everything is functional. There's just like some stuff that needs clean up and some additions that get added on later. But let's go back to what we were talking about with the chat with this name class plugin. So when you load a chat with this name class plugin, it tells you the grouping you have here, right? So we have, for example, single focus is Unity of the Vampire. Now, if you are a warrior, you don't want to memorize that you need Unity of the Vampire or Talisman of the Usurper. But it's easy to remember that it's always going to be single focus or group focus. So if on another character, I send my shaman a buff me request. So it's tell to their name, buff me, and then what I want, and I say single focus, it's going to memorize the single focus. If I put single target cure disease, it should do that as well. Let's find out if it does that. Yep, so it's going to do that. If I do group focus, it'll do that. Now, I can you can also request by name. So you could, if you're not running one of the chat with this name class plugins, it's not going to have these groups. But you can still say, hey, let me get a Unity of the Vampire, and you can request it by name, or you can request, a lower level one or whatever, like any spell directly by name, you can request that. So, for example, I'm going to manually pause the CWTN plugin right now just so I can check this. Let's go in here. We'll go to Wild Growth, right? So I'm going to go over to this other thing, and I'm going to say, hey man, I want Wild Growth. And I'm going to send him a message. Boom, it's Wild Growth. We're going to memorize it. As soon as that's ready, we're going to cast it. I guess. Okay, fuck that. We don't want that. That shit's taking forever. Let's look for a different spell. Maybe Endure Cold. Let's do like a weird Endure Cold. And then you can request that, and it's going to put Endure Cold in here. Since it's at the top and the bottom, it can't do the X out thing. And I had like gummed it up because I unpaused and did all that stuff. So let's see, Endure Cold. Now memorizing endure cold. And it's casting. And then the window goes away because you have nothing to show. Now, what I said before about the display UI, this is an option to like always display the UI. Most people probably don't care. Most people aren't going to go and like manipulate stuff or mess with those settings on a regular basis. You can just do the Buff Me UI, which toggles the display. But you can do the display UI as well, if that's something you want displayed 24/7. But this being able to send this and then seeing all of the characters all at the same time, get that is pretty sweet. So all of the classes have an all. Okay, so we were talking before about the groupings here. You can ask for a grouping, and it won't do stuff like if you ask them to friggin' spear, like here, if I buff me spear, it shouldn't do it. So let's find that out. Let's wait till this fades. Cast the spell. It should unpause it when it's done. It's putting its spell back. We just requested it, and we sent back a message saying that that was invalid, that you can request it by name. So if the spell's no good, like if you try to ask it to cast Gate, pretty sure I have this. So yeah, here you go. The Paladin asked for Gate, which is not valid. So we're not gonna do Gate. So each class has an all grouping, right? So if we send a buff with all, we get those 3 buffs that I had mentioned here from the Shaman, right? So Talisman, we're just doing group. I might end up doing like all and then all group. That way you can just request the single buffs if somehow you're trying to nurse mana or something. I just figured just all is a really easy one to get your group fully buffed or whatever. We'll eventually integrate in some like being able to MGB options for stuff, and that'll be for like the big things like MGB for focus or group ageism or whatever, those sorts of things. In the meantime, in the current time, it does not have that, but that's something that we'll probably allow a little bit later. But like I said, this works in combat. So if you have, you don't need to be BYOS to do it. It has nothing to do with the Chat with Name class plugin. You don't have to be running Chat with Name class plugins. If I unload this, if I plug in MQ2 Shaman unload, right, and I say buff me with Endure Cold, it's still gonna do it. It's going to look for Endure Cold, and it's going to do the thing. So it has nothing to do with the Chat with the Same class plugins, other than the ease and usability of it and being able to see things posted to the window and such. But if you're unsure like what to ask for buff-wise, just do all. One of the really neat things, like for the mage, if you request all, and again, the all grouping is for if the character is running a Chat with the Same class plugin. If you send a message to the mage and say all, it'll give you group damage shield, and if you're a pet class, it'll give you a pack of pet weapons. So then you can hand those out, which is pretty fucking rad. If you're not a pet grouping or if you're not a pet user, it won't give you that stuff. So this is already in your build. You can load it and give it a try. I need to get up the commands and frequently asked questions and the resource page and all of that stuff. But it's in there. This should help out for like cross-computer stuff or like whatnot. I need someone to give me something, or you're running with a friend who's not on the local network, local PC. Now you can just request buffs and it'll just give them to you. You have hotkey set up. You could even do something like if you're in a raid, you can set up an LEM or whatever to send a request if for some reason you died and you want buffs. You can just have a designated cleric and shaman for buffs, and just tell them, hey, buff me with this X, Y, and Z, and then they'll do it. But it's pretty simple. Plug in shaman, load that bad boy up again. Let's see what else we can find here just for fun. Oops. we'll do like the old school buff me, and I'm typing group str. So it should do this group strength Talisman of Might. Yep, Talisman of Might, heading to Paladin. We memorize we're casting it. We should unpause after that. So it'll say pause is now true, set by MQ2 Buff Me. So it's telling us where it's coming from, where it's actually doing the pausing. And then it's going to unpause itself by MQ2 Buff Me. So that's that. Mess around with it, and I'll get the resource and all that cool stuff up here shortly. But that should really help folks who are trying to do their own raids or doing like multiple group or cross group stuff. It also, this does work in the guild hall, and like I said, it supersedes MQ2 like the chat with this name class plugins for the GH buff bot. So you can just have tunes load this and sit around the guild hall and just request buffs, and they'll happily do it for you. All right, well, that's that, and I hope you guys enjoy